Half-Life 3 is the most infamous unreleased game in history. Every few years, the conversation resurfaces. A leak here, a hint there, but nothing ever comes from Valve directly. So today, we're going all the way back to the very beginning. We're breaking down every event, every rumor, every leak, and every piece of confirmed information through the years, from the late 1990s all the way up to the latest developments in 2025. This is the complete timeline of the long, strange road of Half-Life 3. 1999. In 1999, something small but notable happened in the background. The domain halflife3.com was registered using the same contact information as halflife2.com, with Valve listed as the point of contact. At the time, it barely registered with the public and most players had no idea it even existed, but in hindsight, it became the first breadcrumb in the trail that would stretch across decades. For years, the domain would redirect users to the Orangebox website, later switching to a simple under construction page, but today it shows nothing more than a basic registry confirmation. 2006. In 2006, Valve announced that Half-Life 2 Episode 3 was planned for a Christmas 2007 release. Around the same time, they explained that new episodes were intended to arrive every 6 to 8 months, each one designed to be a focused 4 to 6 hour experience. During those announcements, Valve also mentioned Episode 4, a separate project being developed outside the studio with its own standalone plot. That detail confirmed that at least one additional Half-Life episode was in the works beyond the existing trilogy, and that other teams were contributing to the series alongside Valve. 2007. In 2007, information about Episode 3 began to surface in small pieces. In June, Valve confirmed that Gordon Freeman would remain the main protagonist. Around that time, David Sparrow and Doug Lombardi discussed the game's development in an interview, explaining that a significant amount of work had gone into creating a natural progression of topography and climate from Episode 2 into Episode 3. They mentioned that players would not be returning to City 17 in this entry, and Sparrow declined to comment on speculation from PC Gamer UK that the game's climax might take place at an Arctic research station. In October, Episode 2 got released, ending with Gordon and Alyx preparing to travel to Arctic locations in search of Judith Mossman and the Borealis, which is the Aperture Science icebreaker recovered at the end of the game, strongly implying that Episode 3 would follow this storyline. In November, Sparrow explained that Valve intentionally chose not to include a Episode 3 teaser at the end of Episode 2, partially to avoid disrupting the emotional impact of the finale, and partially to keep their creative options open. Near the same time, the first concept art for Episode 3 was released through Games Radar, offering an early visual glimpse of the project. And in December, Valve commented that Episode 3 would conclude the current Half-Life 2 story arc, but not the overall Half-Life franchise, noting that more episodic games unrelated to this arc, including the previous mentioned Episode 4, were still planned. 2008. In 2008, several pieces of concept art for Episode 3 surfaced when images from Andrea Wuckland's Picasso portfolio were uploaded and quickly leaked before being taken down. The following month, in April, source code for 3 entities appeared in the Source SDK inside a folder labeled Episode 3, which included an armored Combine soldier, bolt-firing scanner, and a prototype weapon. These files were removed shortly after, and Valve later stated that they were remnants of older material. In July, another piece of Episode 3 concept art was released through the Into the Pixel contest, depicting Gordon Freeman face-to-face with a Combine advisor. That same month, Games Radar published what would be the third and final known piece of Episode 3 concept art. In October, Doug Lombardi mentioned in an interview that news or an announcement about Half-Life 3 might arrive near the end of the year, while also noting that the gap between Episode 2 and its sequel would be longer than the spacing between the previous Half-Life 2 releases. In December, video footage claiming to show an alpha version of Episode 3 appeared online, but was later confirmed to be fan-made maps rather than actual Valve material. 2009. In 2009, anticipation for news about the future of Half-Life grew as fans expected an announcement on June 1st, but instead, Valve revealed Left 4 Dead 2, which immediately led to the creation of a large Steam boycott group. A few days later, on June 4th, a Steam user named SurfRock22 launched a petition titled Message to Valve, asking the company to communicate more openly with the Half-Life fanbase and share any information about the series' future. In August, Gabe Newell participated in a small discussion with hearing-impaired players, where he mentioned Valve was testing the idea of adding deaf characters to future games set in the Half-Life and Portal universe. Later that same month, Newell said in an interview that Valve had nothing new to announce about Episode 3, explaining only that the community would be informed once Valve had material they were ready to share. 2010. In 2010, Gabe Newell mentioned in a March interview that Valve intended to bring the Half-Life series back towards a psychological horror. That same month, the Portal ARG began, and early on some fans speculated that it might be connected to Episode 3, a theory that faded once it became clear that the ARG was teasing Portal 2. In April, Newell stated that Gordon Freeman would remain the same kind of silent protagonist in the next Half-Life installment, saying that the focus was on making the supporting characters more compelling. In July, shortly after Alien Swarm released, unused hint nodes referencing Episode 3, including labels like EP3 Blob Shake Position and EP3 Fire Cover Position, were found in the game's SDK, along with a node named Aperture Nest, all believed to be leftover assets. And finally, in August, Doug Lombardi said that while Valve disliked making the community wait, they still had no announcements to give regarding Gordon Freeman or his ongoing story. 2011. In February 2011, Chet Falsick said that Valve was not prepared to talk about Episode 3. The following month, Doug Lombardi reiterated that Valve wasn't finished with the Gordon Freeman story and encouraged fans to stay patient. On April 19th, Portal 2 released, along with the final hours of Portal 2, where Jeff Keighley wrote that Portal 2 might be Valve's last traditional single-player game, a statement Gabe Newell later clarified by saying Valve wasn't abandoning single-player but wanted to evolve it into more what he called single-player plus. In May, Newell also explained that Valve had moved away from the episodic model and preferred updating games continuously through Steam. That same month, users discovered animation files in Portal 2 that referenced Arnie Magnuson. The files used prefixes not seen in Episode 2, suggesting that they were cut content or planned for future Half-Life games. In June, during the Games for Change festival, Newell responded to a question about Episode 3 by saying, "If you know enough to ask the question, then you know enough what the answer is." In August, 3 Half-Life fans gathered outside Valve's office to protest the lack of information about the series. Gabe Newell stepped outside to talk with them, shared lunch, gave them a tour, and let them playtest Dota 2. But sadly, he offered no news about Half-Life. In late September, a Vietnamese Dota 2 beta tester leaked the full client, which included code references to an Episode 3 folder containing weapons like an ice gun and a flamethrower, though Chet Falsick later said that the files didn't mean anything. In December, rumors of a Half-Life ARG began circulating online, with supposed hints appearing in Wheatley's VGA acceptance video, fake emails, a Doug Ratman Twitter account, and the cryptic site called black-aperture.com, all of which were later denied by Valve employees. Oh, I'm gonna butcher this. On December 1st, developer Chandana Ekayanaki photographed someone believed to be a Valve employee wearing a Half-Life 3 t-shirt, which led to Mark Laidlaw confirming the shirt existed but had nothing more to add. On December 9th, an anonymous voice actor claimed that Valve had recorded lines for Half-Life Episode 3, fueling rumors of a VGA reveal that never happened. Throughout Valve's 2011 Steam holiday sale, promotional art featured several Half-Life references, including 3 socks labeled for Gordon, Alyx, and Dog, along with 3 clouds in a Portal 2 scene, and finally a Steam mascot wearing a golden lambda necklace with 3 glowing dots, all of which fueled even more speculation. On December 23rd, voice actor John Patrick Lowry stated that neither he nor Ellen McLean had recorded anything for the new Half-Life game, which contradicts earlier claims. Finally, on December 26th, a long-running petition that began in 2009 evolved into a large Steam group called a Call for Communication, which grew rapidly as fans continued to demand answers. 2012. In early 2012, Half-Life references began appearing in the Counter-Strike Global Offensive beta, including whiteboard textures on the map Office that listed the names of Half-Life 2 characters. On January 5th, fans organized Operation Crowbar, a community effort encouraging people to mail crowbars or crowbar images to Valve to push the information about the series. A few days later, IGN editor Charles Onyett publicly speculated that 2012 might be the year Valve finally addressed Half-Life 3, suggesting that the company could be waiting on next-generation console details. On January 13th, Mark Laidlaw confirmed the long-rumored Return to Ravenholm project by Arcane Studios, stating that it's been in development between 2006 and 2009 before being cancelled. And around the same time, Gary Newman joked about the situation by sharing a fake Half-Life 3 shirt he claimed Valve had sent him. By January 19th, the Steam group A Call for Communication had been covered by more than 24 gaming outlets. And on February 4th, the group organized a Red Letter Day, an event where thousands of fans launched Half-Life 2 at the same time to draw attention to Valve's silence. In April, Gabe Newell appeared on the 7-Day Cooldown podcast and jokingly referred to the next Half-Life installment as Ricochet 2, explaining that discussing the game too early often caused plans to shift internally, while also confirming that people who had worked on it were still involved. In June, the Breen Grub Twitter account began posting in character as Dr. Breen, which Mark Laidlaw later revealed he was writing himself. Later that month, a video surfaced showing Gabe Newell forging a crowbar, followed by another clip in August where he jokingly said, "You'll never get Half-Life 3 if you eat me." Around that same period, Matt Katz released a promotional video for a new keyboard that briefly featured a Half-Life 3 logo, among other icons. 2013. In 2013, new information about Half-Life surfaced in several unexpected ways. Throughout the year, Valve worked on a Half-Life 3 prototype built on an early version of the Source 2 engine. The concept aimed to blend scripted story moments with procedurally generated combat inspired by Left 4 Dead 2. But development proved difficult and the prototype was ultimately abandoned because Source 2 wasn't ready at the time. On February 6, Gabe Newell and J.J. Abrams appeared together for a talk titled Storytelling Across Platforms, where Abrams mentioned an idea for a video game he wanted to make with Valve, and Newell responded by saying Valve was also interested in collaborating with Bad Robot on a Half-Life or Portal film. Later that month, on March 28th, game designer David Goldfarb tweeted about visiting Valve, and when somebody asked if that meant Half-Life 3 confirmed, he responded with playful replies that helped keep the speculation alive. In June, an internal Valve mailing list titled Half-Life 3 leaked online, showing 42 employees attached to the group at the time when the company had roughly 300 workers. Over the summer, voice actor John Patrick Lowry said that the reason Half-Life 3 hadn't been released was because Valve wanted better motion capture technology that could essentially adapt to a player's behavior, later clarifying that the voice actors are usually the last to know anything. In August, a fan who toured Valve headquarters said that their guide claimed the project existed only as disconnected pieces without a story. A second mailing list leaked appeared in September, this time listing 46 employees, along with a separate Half-Life 3 core group containing 10 names. By the end of September, trademarks for both Half-Life 3 and Portal were filed and then quietly removed days later, adding even more fuel to the rumors. 2014. On January 3rd, an interview with Gabe Newell was released in which he explained when Valve started out, they were a single-player video game company that could have been very successful just making Half-Life sequels over and over and over again. But instead, the team collectively decided to focus on multiplayer games, even though at the time there hadn't really been a commercially successful multiplayer title. Later that year, on May 23rd, former Valve employee Min Lee, who had left the company 5 years earlier, stated in an interview that he had seen concept art that appeared to be set in the Half-Life universe. 2015. In 2015, Valve spent much of the year developing the Lab, a collection of VR minigames for the HTC Vive. One experiment during that time was a Half-Life themed arcade-style FPS prototype called Shooter, which was ultimately dropped due to limited development time. Around the same period, Mark Laidlaw worked on a separate VR prototype called Borealis, designed to let players explore the Aperture science ship from Episode 2, but that project also failed to gain internal traction and was eventually cancelled. The same year, Valve publicly announced the Source 2 engine, which made its first real appearance a few months later through the Dota 2 Reborn beta. Developer Jeet Barnett later said that Valve had been experimenting with Half-Life characters and assets in VR, though he emphasized these tests did not confirm an actual Half-Life VR game. Gabe Newell also addressed the company's franchises, saying that Valve still cares about them, including Half-Life, but would only return to a traditional sequel if enough developers internally wanted to pursue it and had a strong reason for doing so. Later in the year, the release of the Steam VR app Destinations led data miners to uncover multiple references to HLVR, including familiar Half-Life weapons and props, suggesting that Valve was exploring something more substantial in virtual reality. In July, the YouTube channel The Know claimed to have information from an anonymous Valve source saying Half-Life 3 had been deep into development for years with around 100 people, before staff were reassigned to projects like Left 4 Dead 2, Portal 2, and Dota 2. That source also claimed Valve had little incentive to release a new Half-Life game, feared backlash if it wasn't perfect, and that only about 10 people remained on the project. Mark Laidlaw responded by calling the claims the work of someone trolling, explaining that fear did not guide Valve's decisions, and that Half-Life stories were never written as complete scripts in advance. The Know later shared additional emails from Laidlaw detailing Valve's writing process, while Tyler McVicker released his own response explaining why parts of the rumor didn't align with Valve's internal structure. As the debate continued, more HLVR-related references appeared in later Destinations updates. A Dota 2 patch included files like HL3.txt, and developer Ken Birdwell commented that a traditional Half-Life VR game could quickly fatigue players. Near the end of the year, Half-Life 3 briefly appeared on a leaked Steam database list. 2016 began with the loss of several key people who had helped define the Half-Life franchise for years. Mark Laidlaw, the longtime writer behind the series, announced he had left Valve and retired from gaming writing entirely, ending the era in which he served as the narrative backbone of the Half-Life universe. Soon after, animator Doug Wood also left the company and stepped away from the industry, marking the loss of another voice closely tied to the Half-Life series. During this time, Valve quietly began exploring a new direction for the franchise by creating the first prototype of what eventually became Half-Life Alyx, experimenting with the idea of bringing the Half-Life world into virtual reality. That early version continued to evolve throughout the year as Valve shifted towards building a full VR experience instead of a simple test. Outside of game development, the Half-Life universe was still active in other ways. J.J. Abrams confirmed that writing teams were working on both the long-discussed Half-Life and Portal film adaptations, showing Valve was still open to expanding the universe even without traditional sequels. Fans also marked the 10th anniversary of the original Episode 3 announcement, sparking retrospectives and discussion across the community while Valve remained silent as usual. Toward the end of the year, new clues suggested that the mysterious HLVR project was still moving forward internally. A Dota 2 update included references to a new feature involving voice interaction, once again pointing to Valve's VR experiment and confirming that the project had installed. For fans hoping to return to the Half-Life universe, these small hints became the only clear signs that Valve was quietly building something behind the scenes. 2017. In early January, an anonymous Valve developer told Game Informer that over the years the studio had tried many different prototypes for the next Half-Life game, including an RTS and even a live-action choice-driven project. They then said Valve's leadership, ultimately guided by Gabe Newell, had watched multiple teams form and fall apart. Some with only a few people, others growing to 30 or 40 before being shut down, and that each failed attempt made it harder for any new pitch to gain momentum. On January 17th, Gabe Newell held a rare AMA and answered several questions about the Half-Life universe. He confirmed that new games set in the Portal or Half-Life world were possible, replied yep when asked about upcoming films with J.J. Abrams, and clarified that his comments about Portal 2 being his favorite Valve game had nothing to do with Half-Life's future. He also explained that Valve avoided giving updates because their internal process often involved major changes or cancellations late in development, joked that number 3 must not be said, and confirmed the studio is still making single-player experiences. On February 7th, Michael Shapiro gave an interview saying he believed the Combine story wasn't finished, though he couldn't discuss details. Days later, reports surfaced that Valve was working on 3 VR games. During an open meeting with the press, Tyler McVicker showed employees a photo of a woman using a Vive headset with a Half-Life 3 icon visible on the monitor. Newell and the team laughed, saying the icon, just like the Half-Life 3 shirts seen at GDC, was just employees trolling. Newell also refused to comment on the rumored HLVR project. On April 1st, a visitor spotted a Half-Life 3 release party tomorrow poster in Valve's lobby. Another April Fool's joke in line with Newell's earlier comments saying the staff loves to tease fans. That summer, Mark Laidlaw said that Episode 3 would not have had a definitive ending and was meant to leave room for future stories. He admitted he didn't know whether Half-Life 3 would ever happen and had no plans to return to Valve. In the early morning of August 25th, Laidlaw released Epistle 3, a gender-swapped, fictionalized retelling of the Episode 3 story, describing Gordon and Alyx traveling to the Arctic, finding the Borealis phasing through time, encountering followers of Wallace Brain, rescuing Judith Mossman, and deciding whether to destroy or ground the ship before the G-Man intervenes. He ended up describing it as fanfic, stressing that these were rough ideas that would have changed heavily during the real development. 2 days later, Valve News Network reported that leaked Episode 1 and Episode 2 maps included test content worked on as late as 2014, suggesting some form of Episode 3 or Half-Life 3 development lasted longer than expected. VNN and modder Jackathan then released Half-Life 2 Aftermath, a playable mod built from the leaked maps and leftover assets. The year closed on October 10th, the 10-year anniversary of the Orange Box in Episode 2. Valve acknowledged the milestone, but offered no updates for the future of the series, leaving fans still waiting for any signs of a new installment. 2018. In 2018, Half-Life references kept showing up in unexpected places. During the Steam Lunar New Year sale, Valve included Dog from Half-Life 2 among several dog-themed images, a small detail that immediately caught the community's attention. A few weeks later, Final Fantasy XV announced a Half-Life cosmetic pack for the Steam release, giving players Gordon Freeman's HEV suit, glasses, and a crowbar. In the promotional video, director Hajime Tabata wore a headcrab hat he said was sent directly from Valve, which fans took as another sign that the company still publicly acknowledges the series. Throughout the year, data miners uncovered several rounds of leaked code from Dota 2 updates and Steam VR, revealing references to Vortigaunts, VR pistols, Zen environments, zombies, fizz guns, and repeated mentions of HLVR. These discoveries showed that Valve's VR project was still active and continuing to grow with new features. By November, Tyler McVicker reported that the leaks pointed towards HLVR being a single-player, narrative-driven VR FPS developed alongside Valve's in-house VR headset, and that the project was shaping up as a prequel to Half-Life 2, though Valve still hadn't announced anything publicly. 2019. In early 2019, Valve held a full internal playtest of HLVR, giving the entire company a chance to try the project in its current state. The gameplay was praised, but the story, originally written by Rob Yescombe, was criticized for being too dark and not matching the tone of the Half-Life universe. That feedback pushed Valve to bring back several key writers. Eric Woolpall returned from working on Psychonauts 2, Jay Pinkerton, who had already rejoined the company a year before, continued on the project, and Firewatch developers Sean Vanneman and Jake Rodkin joined the team to rebuild the narrative. Around this time, Woolpall and Pinkerton's return became public. On June 14th, Tyler McVicker reported new HLVR leaks suggesting the project had entered crunch, reinforcing that development was moving quickly. A few months later, on November 18th, 12 years after Episode 2 and 1 day before the anniversary of the original Half-Life, Valve officially announced Half-Life Alyx as their flagship VR game. 3 days later, the full reveal trailer dropped, pre-orders opened, and the Half-Life website was completely redesigned. Jeff Keighley also announced the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, covering the game's development and the state of the franchise after Episode 2. In interviews following the announcement, developer Robin Walker explained that when work began in 2016, the team had seriously explored the ideas of Half-Life 3, but found the expectations surrounding a traditional sequel overwhelming. Being able to build a full VR title provided a creative direction without that weight, and Walker said that whether Alyx might eventually lead to a VR-based Half-Life 3 would depend entirely on how players responded. 2020. 2020 was the year Half-Life Alyx finally reached players. On March 3rd, IGN released the first direct feed gameplay footage from an early section of the game as part of their IGN First program. giving the public their first extended look at Valve's VR return to the Half-Life universe. Later that month, on March 23rd, Half-Life Alyx officially launched on Steam, becoming the first new entry in the series in 12 years. Alongside the release, developer Robin Walker explained what had happened with Half-Life 2 Episode 3 and why so many attempts at a follow-up had stalled. He said that the team had never found a version of Episode 3 that felt like a proper conclusion to the episodic trilogy, and that several larger Half-Life projects tried afterward also failed to progress far enough to become real sequels. Walker added that Mark Laidlaw's Epistle 3 resembled a collection of ideas Laidlaw had explored internally rather than a finalized story. On July 9th, Jeff Keighley released the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, which detailed the game's development and revealed numerous cancelled Valve projects, including several abandoned versions of Half-Life 3. The book also mentioned an unannounced Valve game that had been in development since 2018. Later that year, on December 3rd, Tyler McVicker reported that this unannounced project, internally called Citadel, was an asymmetric multiplayer game designed for both VR and traditional PC play, and that while its connection to the Half-Life universe had shifted over time, it still appeared to be in active development. 2022. In 2022, new clues surfaced through data mining Aperture Desk Job, which released on March 1st. A week later, on March 8th, Tyler McVicker reported that the game's files contained leftover code from at least 4 different Valve projects. A Source 2 port of Counter-Strike Global Offense, which would later become CS2, a follow-up Half-Life Alyx internally labeled HLX, a revived version of the long-abandoned fstop/SteamPal project, and the multiplayer title known as Citadel. McVicker cautioned that leak code didn't always reflect active development, but he did note that Citadel contained enough detailed notes to suggest it was in a fairly advanced state. His findings showed that Valve was experimenting in several directions at once, and that the Half-Life universe was still present inside at least some internal projects, even if nothing had been officially announced. 2024. In 2024, speculation around Valve's secret projects resurfaced after months of leaks finally pointed to the major changes inside the company. In May, gameplay footage and screenshots leaked from the project once known as Citadel, later codenamed Neon Prime, and now titled Deadlock. The leaks confirmed that any remaining Half-Life connections have been removed, solidifying it as an original IP rather than a continuation of the franchise. Then, in August, fans noticed that a well-known voice actor briefly listed an unannounced Valve project called Project White Sands on their professional website before removing it. The name immediately drew attention because White Sands is a real missile testing range in New Mexico, the same state where Black Mesa is located in the Half-Life lore. On November 16th, Valve released the Half-Life 2 20th anniversary documentary, which featured developers discussing their past work on Episode 3. And on December 28th, data miner Gabe Follower reported that Valve's long-rumored Half-Life project, known publicly as HLX, had begun internal and friends and family playtest, a milestone that historically signals a game nearing a releasable state at Valve. He cautioned that this didn't guarantee a launch anytime soon, noting that some past projects were cancelled even after reaching this stage, but said the chances of a new Half-Life release were now the strongest they have ever been since the Alyx leaks. 2 days later, on December 31st, Michael Shapiro, the voice of G-Man, released a New Year's message in character hinting at unexpected surprises in the coming years, a moment fans found unusually well-timed given the renewed Half-Life activity. 2025. By 2025, expectations for a new Half-Life title were higher than they have been in years, fueled by ongoing data mining and behind-the-scenes reports. In October, Tyler McVicker released a new installment of his HLX file series, explaining that recent Source 2 code leaks showed Valve's Half-Life project had entered a polish phase, with development shifting towards cleaning up assets and preparing the game for a future reveal. He also mentioned reoccurring rumors that Valve was preparing a trailer, suggesting a release could follow within months, though he warned fans not to assume anything given Valve's history of shelving projects late in development. In November, Valve announced a new hardware lineup, including updated Steam machines, a new Steam controller, and a Steam Frame VR headset. Because Valve often pairs major hardware launches with major game releases, industry writers and longtime Half-Life watchers speculated that a reveal of the HLX project might be close. However, data miners like Gabe Follower and McVicker again urged people to keep expectations in check, pointing to previous moments where excitement had surged only to be met with silence and reminding fans that until Valve said something publicly, nothing was certain. In December, attention centered around the Game Awards as the final heavily speculated window for a Half-Life announcement in 2025. Sadly, the event finished and there was no reveal, no trailer, or mention of the franchise at all, despite widespread anticipation. Afterwards, reporting clarified that most of the Game Awards speculation was driven by fan interpretation, not confirmed leaks, and that the insiders had warned that the show was an unlikely venue. Good news is, industry reporters still maintain that Half-Life is in active development and expected to be announced on Valve's own terms, either late 2025 or in 2026. The silence at the Game Awards ultimately aligned with Valve's history of avoiding public showcases and keeping its timelines deliberately opaque. Looking back across more than 25 years, the history of Half-Life 3 has never been straightforward. It's a trail of experiments, reboots, abandoned projects, leaks, rumors, and brief moments where something inside Valve genuinely seemed to be moving. Each year added another clue, another spark of hope. Half-Life became one of the few franchises where silence created more impact than any sequel ever could. What happens next is only known to Valve, likely only to Gabe Newell himself. Until they decide the world is ready, all we can do is wait and see whether Half-Life 3 is truly on the horizon or still somewhere just out of reach. Thank you all for watching. This one was a big undertaking and it took a lot of effort to put together. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing and sticking around. I'd love to have you. And if you have any ideas for future videos about games, shows, or anything else, drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to cover them. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.